Buying a new home is usually an exciting time in most people's lives. That is, of course, after you've gotten through choosing a home, bidding on it, going through all the paperwork and all that comes with the purchasing of a new home. Once you've finally purchased your home and have those keys in your hand, most dream and imagine where they're going to place and or arrange furniture and pictures. What color they might be painting the house, inside and out. When you buy your own home, speaking from my own personal experience, you make it your own. Welcome back for another episode of True Crimes and Mysteries with Ricochet Rains. Welcome to the town of Westfield, New Jersey, a town of roughly 29,000 residents. Westfield is the 29th largest town in New Jersey. Not too shabby. Most people enjoy a realistic feeling of safety. Some to this very day don't lock their doors. Westfield is a town of grand, restored Victorians and stately mansions perched on tree-lined streets. It's the kind of place many people dream of calling home. The downtown Westfield features mom-and-pop businesses. Busy roads in Westfield are often closed off, so residents can listen to live music while dining outdoors, participating in children's arts and crafts, or while taking open-air yoga classes. Yes, some people do that. Many who grow up in the affluent suburb often return after college to raise their own families. Most newcomers aren't usually aware of Westfield's dark side, and that's how the residents would like to keep it. However, it definitely has many. For the purposes of keeping this video short, we'll be covering one mystery, and to this day, it's unsolved. Get ready. Here we go. Oh, before we get started, grab a Scooby snack and your favorite beverage. Chapter 1. The Broaddus Family. Now, just to clarify, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that last name correctly, but if I'm not, I don't know, maybe you could throw a book at me. In 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus bought their dream home in the affluent suburb of Westfield, New Jersey. Maria was already very familiar with the suburb, as she had been raised in Westfield, and the house was only a short few blocks from her childhood home. Derek, on the other hand, had grown up in Maine, in a relatively middle-class environment, then moved his way up the career ladder, becoming a senior vice president, and receiving a salary that allowed the couple to afford a $1.3 million house. The Broaddus couple and their 3 children were ready to embark on a new adventure at 657 Boulevard, Westfield, New Jersey. Chapter 2. Welcome to the neighborhood. One night in June, in 2014, it was probably the 5th day of June, Derek Broaddus had just finished painting his newly purchased home in Westfield and decided to check the mailbox. Derek and his wife Maria had just closed on the 6-bedroom house at 657 Boulevard 3 days earlier, which they purchased for $1,355,657. Wow, that's a lot of money. They were also doing some renovations before moving in. As you probably can imagine, since they hadn't moved in yet, there wasn't much in their mailbox except for a few bills. As they pulled out the mail, they found a white card-shaped envelope with odd, thick black lettering. The card-shaped envelope was addressed to the new owner, and the typed note inside began nicely enough.
Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood.
As Derek kept reading the letter from his new neighbor, it took a very weird and dark turn.
How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 65 Boulevard has been the subject of my family For decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors, so that you can destroy the house. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Are there more on the way? I asked the woods to bring me young blood, and it looks like they listened. Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard and all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. Welcome, my friends, welcome. Let the party begin. The Watcher.
The envelope had no return address, and it concluded with a suggestion that the message would not be the last. Earlier in the week, Derek and Maria had gone to the house and chatted with their new neighbors, while their children, who were 5, 8, and 10 years old, ran around the backyard with several kids. Did the letter writer, the Watcher, notice? It was about 10 p.m. that night, and Derek Broaddus was alone. He raced around the house, turning off lights so no one could see inside, and called the Westfield Police Department. An officer came to the house, read the letter, and said, "What the fuck is this?" He asked Derek if he had enemies and recommended moving a piece of construction equipment from the back porch in case the Watcher tried to toss it through the window. Derek rushed back to his wife and kids, who were living at their old house, which was also in Westfield. That night, Derek and Maria wrote an email to John and Andrea Woods, the couple who sold them the home, to ask them if they knew of the Watcher. Andrea Woods replied the next morning. A few days before moving out, the Woods had also received a letter from the Watcher. The note had been odd, she said, and made similar mention of the Watcher's family observing the house over time. But Andrea said she and her husband had never received anything like it in 23 years while living in the house, and had thrown the letter away without much thought. That day, the Woods went with Maria to the police station, where Detective Leonard Lugo told her not to tell anyone about the letters, including her neighbors, most of whom she had never met, and all of whom were now suspects. The Broadduses spent the coming weeks on high alert. Derek canceled a work trip, and whenever Maria took the kids to their new house, she would yell their names if they wandered into a corner of the yard. When Derek gave a tour of the renovation to a couple on the block, he froze when the wife said, "It'll be nice to have some young blood in the neighborhood." The Broaddus' general contractor arrived one morning to find that a heavy sign he'd hammered into the front yard had been ripped out overnight. That's kind of weird, right? Chapter 3. Happy Moving In Day. 2 weeks after the letter arrived, Maria stopped by the house to look at some paint samples and check the mail. She recognized the thick black lettering on a card-shaped envelope and called the police.
Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy, and I've been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time they will. I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. You certainly say their names often.
The letter asked about one child in particular, whom the writer had seen using an easel inside an enclosed porch.
Is she the artist in the family? 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic? Or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and the doors on 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the Watcher, and I've been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on, and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now, you are too, Broaddus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy move-in day. You know I'll be watching.
This time, the Watcher had addressed Derek and Maria directly, though they spelled their last name wrong. Had the Watcher been close enough to hear one of the Broaddus' contractors talking with him? The Watcher bragged of learning a lot about the family in the previous weeks, especially about the children. The letter identified the Broaddus' 3 children by birth order and by their nicknames, the ones Maria had used when calling to the children. Derek and Maria stopped bringing their kids to the house. They were no longer sure when or if they would even move in. Several weeks later, a 3rd letter arrived.
Where have you been? Where have you gone to?
The Watcher wrote.
657 Boulevard is missing you.
Built in 1905, 657 Boulevard was perhaps the grandest home on the block. And when the Woods put it on the market, they had received multiple offers above their asking price. That led the Broadduses to initially suspect that the Watcher might be someone upset over losing out on the house. But the Woods said one interested buyer had backed out after a bad medical diagnosis, while the other had already found a different home. In an email to the Broadduses, Andrea Woods proposed another theory. Would the mention of the contractor trucks and your children suggest that it was someone in the neighborhood? The letters indicated proximity. Remember the comment about the easel? When Derek and Maria walked Detective Lugo around the house, they showed him that the easel on the porch was hidden from the street by vegetation, making it difficult to see unless someone was behind the house or right next door. A few days after the first letter, Maria and Derek went to a barbecue across the street, welcoming them and another new homeowner to the block. That sounds like a pretty nice street there. The Broadduses hadn't told anyone about the Watcher, as the police had instructed, and found themselves scanning the party for clues while keeping tabs on their kids, who ran through a crowd that made up much of the suspect pool. At one point, Derek was chatting with John Schmidt, who lived 2 doors down, when Schmidt told him about the Langfords, who lived between them. Peggy Langford was in her 90s, and several of her adult children, all in their 60s, lived with her. The family was a bit odd, Schmidt said, but harmless. He described one of the younger Langfords, Michael, who didn't work and had a beard like Ernest Hemingway. Derek thought the case was solved. The Langford house was right next to the easel on the porch. The family had lived there since the 1960s, when the Watcher's father, the letter said, had begun observing 657 Boulevard. Richard Langford, the family patriarch, had died 12 years earlier, and the current Watcher claimed to have been on the job for the better part of 2 decades. When the Broadduses told Lugo about the family, he said he already knew, and a week after the first letter arrived, he brought Michael to the police headquarters for an interview. There wasn't much hard evidence, and after a few weeks, the police chief told the Broadduses that, short of someone admitting they were the watcher, there wasn't much the department could do. Derek told the cops that if they didn't take care of the situation, they would have a different kind of case on their hands. This person attacked my family, and where I'm from, if you do that, you get your ass beat, but probably not with the New York accent. Frustrated, the Broadduses began their own investigation. Derek became especially obsessed. He set up webcams, watching to see if anyone was watching the house at close range. He also hired a private investigator who staked out the neighborhood and ran background checks on the Langfords, but didn't find anything noteworthy. Derek reached out to a former FBI agent who served as the inspiration for Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs. Yeah, that Silence of the Lambs. They also hired Robert Lenehan, another former FBI agent, to conduct a threat assessment. Lenehan recognized several old-fashioned ticks in the letters that pointed to an older writer. The envelope was addressed to M/M Broaddus, and the sentences had double spaces between them. Lenehan didn't think the watcher was likely to act on the threats, but the letters had enough typos and errors to imply a certain eccentricity.
The house is crying from all the pain it is going through. You have changed it and made it so fancy. You are stealing its history. It cries for the past and what used to be in the time when I roamed it. The 1960s were a good time for 657 Boulevard, when I ran from room to room, imagining the life with the rich occupants there. The house was full of life and young blood. Then it got old, and so did my father. But he kept watching until the day he died. And now I watch and wait for the day when the young blood will be mine again.
Lenehan recommended looking into former housekeepers or their descendants. Perhaps the watcher was jealous that the Broadduses had bought a home that the writer was unable to afford. But the focus remained on the Langfords. In cooperation with the Westfield police, the Broadduses sent a letter to the Langfords announcing plans to tear down the house, hoping to prompt a response. Nothing happened. By the end of 2014 in December, the investigation had stalled. The Westfield police told the Broadduses they had run out of options. Derek showed the letters to his priest, who agreed to bless the house. Nice touch, don't you think? Sounds, quite familiar. Chapter 4. 6 months after the letters arrived, the Broadduses decided to sell 657 Boulevard. They initially listed it for more than they paid to reflect the renovations they had completed. But much like all suburbs, rumors had already begun to spread about why the house was still sitting empty. Derek and Maria thought about what they would have done had the previous owners told them about their letter from the watcher. The Woods, who were both retired scientists, told the Broadduses they remembered the letter they received before moving out as more strange than threatening. After all, the watcher thanked them for taking care of the house. The Broadduses felt the name alone, the watcher, was sinister enough to mention to a new family moving in. And on June 2nd, 2015, a year after buying the house, they filed a legal complaint against the Woods. They argued the Woods should have disclosed the letter, just as they had disclosed water that sometimes got in the basement. The Broadduses said they hoped to reach a quiet settlement. Well, the settlement was anything but quiet.
Why are you here? I will find out. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Those chilling questions allegedly arrived at this Westfield house in 3 letters from someone calling himself the Watcher, according to Derek and Maria Broaddus. The family, with 3 young kids, bought the beautiful home on historic Boulevard for more than $1 million last June, but never moved in, saying they're too terrified of the ominous Watcher. In a recent legal complaint, the family claims they can't sell it either because potential buyers, once notified of the letters, no longer view the property as a safe home. Besides the obvious, like lead paint and radon gas, what should sellers tell you about a house? For example, were notorious murders committed there? Was it haunted by poltergeists?
You've heard about the List House, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this town does have like a history of that, so.
With the national news media shining a spotlight on the case, Baron Chambliss, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, a veteran detective from the Westfield police, was brought in to investigate. Chambliss knew his colleagues had looked closely at Michael Langford, a neighbor. According to his brother Sandy Langford, Michael had been diagnosed with schizophrenia as a young man. He sometimes spooked newcomers to the neighborhood when he did strange things like walking through their backyards or peeking into the windows of homes that were being renovated. But those who knew him said the odd things he did were mostly just unusual, neighborly kindnesses, and they didn't believe he was capable of writing the letters in the first place. As Chambliss looked into the case, he discovered investigators had conducted a DNA analysis on one of the envelopes and determined the DNA belonged to a woman. Chambliss decided to look more closely at Abby Langford, Michael's sister, who worked as a real estate agent. Was she upset about missing a commission right next door? She also worked at the local Lord & Taylor. Chambliss coordinated with a security guard at Lord & Taylor to grab her plastic water bottle during a shift. But Chambliss says the DNA sample was not a match. Not long after, the prosecutor's office gave Derek and Maria some unexpected news. They wouldn't say why or how, but they had ruled out the Langfords as suspects. A year after the fact, it was hard to find fresh leads, and the initial police canvass had been so porous that it had missed a significant clue. Another family on the Boulevard got a similar note from the watcher. The parents of that family had lived in their house for years, and their kids were grown. So they threw the letter away, just as the Woods had. But after the news broke, one of their children posted about it on Facebook, then deleted the post. When the investigators spoke to the family, they confirmed that the letter had been similar to the Broaddus's, but its existence only made the case more confusing. Without going into too much more of the back and forth, there just wasn't a whole lot to go on. The Broaddus's continued to be consumed by the stress and fear, experienced what some would say is PTSD. For the rest of Westfield, the story became little more than a creepy urban legend. In the spring of 2016, the Broaddus's put 657 Boulevard back on the market, but the property didn't sell for one reason or another. Feeling as if they were out of options, the Broaddus's real estate lawyer proposed a worthwhile idea. Sell the house to a developer who could tear it down and split the property into two. That way they would have two partials and have two sellable homes. Dividing it, they believed they could make back most of the money they had spent on the home. Dividing it would require the Westfield's planning board to grant an exception. The two smaller lots would be 67.4 and 67.6 feet wide, just shy of the mandated 70 feet. When the planning board met to decide the application in January 2017, it had already devoted a 3-hour hearing to the issue. More than 100 residents showed up. The hearing lasted 4 hours, during which time there was little discussion of the reason the Broaddus's had been driven to tear down their dream home. At 11:30 p.m., the board unanimously rejected the proposal. A New Jersey judge later denied the Broaddus's appeal of that decision. Wow. Not long after the planning board's decision, the Broaddus's received good news. A family with grown children and 2 big dogs had agreed to rent 657 Boulevard. The renter said he wasn't worried about the watcher and had a clause in the lease that let him out in case of another letter. 2 weeks later, the landlord Derek went to 657 to deal with squirrels that had taken up residence in the roof. The renter handed him an envelope that had just arrived.
Violent winds and bitter cold. To the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife Maria.
Whoa. This letter, 2.5 years after the Watcher appeared, came out of nowhere. It was dated February 13th, the day the Broadduses gave depositions in the lawsuit against the Woodses.
You wonder who the Watcher is? Turn around, idiots. Maybe you even spoke to me. One of the so-called neighbors who has no idea who the Watcher could be. Or maybe you do know and are too scared to tell anyone. Good move. I watched as you watched from the dark house in an attempt to find me. Telescopes and binoculars are wonderful inventions. And the attempt to tear down the house? 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the Boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard with my orders. All hail, the Watcher.
The renter was mentioned and was spooked, but agreed to stay if the Broadduses installed cameras around the house. The letter indicated revenge could come in many forms.
Maybe a car accident. Maybe a fire. Maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break.
It was like we were back at the beginning, said Maria, but it also meant fresh evidence that might help invigorate the investigation. Derek took the letter to the police headquarters, where a detective looked at a neighborhood map and traced a circle around 300 yards in diameter, suggesting the Watcher must be somewhere in there. Derek drew one much closer. In my view, it's one of 10 houses in the world, he said. The Broadduses continued to press the case, but there still wasn't much for law enforcement to go on. The Broadduses no longer live in ever-present fear that the Watcher might strike at any moment, but they continued to deal with lingering effects from the letters. The Watcher was also no longer the only person sending anonymous letters. At Christmas time, specifically Christmas Eve, several families received an envelope in their mailboxes. They'd been delivered by hand to the homes of people who had been the most vocal in criticizing the Broadduses online. One of them, who lived a few blocks down on the Boulevard, had written on Facebook, "I wish we could go back to the days of tar and feathers. I have just a couple in mind." Now, this is my opinion only, but I believe that Facebook post was referring to the Broaddus couple. Another family who got the letter said, "It was weirdly poetic, as the Watchers had been, and that it accused the families of speculating inaccurately about the Broadduses. It included several stories about recent acts of domestic terrorism in which signs of brewing mental illness had gone unnoticed. The typed letters were signed Friends of the Broaddus Family." Who wrote the new letters? Derek Broaddus was approached and asked whether he had written them. He momentarily paused, then admitted he had. He said he wasn't proud of it, and he hadn't even told his wife. He further mentioned they were the only anonymous letters he'd written. Now, I have a problem with this and his statement. They were the only anonymous letters he'd written. Why in the world would he say that? Did he believe the neighbors thought he wrote the Watcher letters himself? As we close, Derek provided a final fourth letter, which stated,
You are despised by the house, and the Watcher won.
Chapter 6. Resident Conclusions. These were conclusions that some of the residents had, and I don't think they're too far off the mark. I probably would be thinking the same. Number one, the Broadduses had suffered possibly buyer's remorse, or realized they couldn't afford the home and concocted an elaborate scheme to get out of the sale. but, you know, once you buy it, right? Number 2, Derek was cooking up some kind of insurance fraud. Now, that could be. Maybe, yeah. Number 3, and I think this is really likely, and I'll tell you why. Number 3, the Broadduses were angling for a movie deal. Well, that's kind of funny because in 2019, Netflix purchased rights to make a story about The Watcher. I'm not sure when it's going to drop, but when it does, remember this video. Remember we told you so. That's what a lot of people think. Now, me personally, I really don't know what to think. If I were to go through those 3 suggestions, I would go with number 3, that they're angling for a movie deal. Yeah, that's it. So, what do you think the reason was for all of this? Do you think that they concocted this stuff to get out of the ownership of the house? For a movie deal? For insurance fraud? If you have a suggestion, go ahead down below and make sure to comment. Thanks for watching True Crime and Mysteries with Ricochet Reigns. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, subscribe, and follow, because there's more coming, and they'll get better. I promise.